Is it better to rent or buy here in Europe? So you're thinking about buying a house or apartment. Your friends say paying rent is throwing away money, and owning your home feels like an important life goal. But it's a big commitment. You're not sure if you can afford it, and you don't want to make an expensive mistake that you will regret. I asked 17 of my wealthiest friends if they rent or buy, and I think their answers will help you decide. Now, this is where I live. I'm a professional investor. I could afford to buy this house with cash, but I don't. I rent. Because when it comes to renting versus buying, there are three factors you should think about. The first is, of course, money. My friend Gatte said, look, my mortgage is 400 euros per month less than my rent would be. So of course I bought my place. It was a no-brainer. Let's look at a case study. Okay, let's assume you want to live in an apartment which costs 1,300 euros to rent, or you could buy it for 200,000 euros. Now, if you put a 20% down payment, that's 40,000 euros, and you borrow 160,000 euros from the bank. With a 20-year mortgage, your monthly mortgage payment would be 1,000 euros. So on the one hand, you have a mortgage of 1,000 euros per month, and on the other, you have a rent payment of 1,300. Obviously, 1,000 is a lot less than 1,300, so it would seem like a slam dunk that you should buy in this case. But there are at least four things that people tend to overlook when making this comparison. The first is the cost of maintaining your property. So if you rent a place and something breaks, it's the landlord's responsibility. If you buy the place, it's your responsibility. And studies suggest that you should budget between 1 and 2% of your property price for annual maintenance costs. So in our case study, let's say it's 1.5%. That's 3,000 euros per year or 250 euros per month in maintenance costs. The second hidden factor is property taxes and insurance. Now, this will depend heavily on where you live, but let's say it's 1% per year. So that would be 2,000 euros per year in our example, or around 165 euros per month. Now, the third thing that almost nobody thinks about is the cost of your time and effort. If anything breaks in this house, I just call my landlord and he fixes it. But if I had to take care of it, it could easily take me between 5 to 10 hours per month because it's a big house. There's a big garden, there's a lot of stuff that goes wrong. Now, if you live in a smaller apartment, maybe it's 2 to 3 hours per month on average, but that is still valuable. So depending on how much you value your free time, let's say that's another 100 euros per month. And the fourth hidden expense that you should think about is upfront costs. In some countries, such as Spain, you can end up paying as much as 10% of your property value in terms of taxes and brokerage fees and notary fees and other kinds of expenses when you buy. But let's be more conservative. Let's say it's 5%, and let's assume that you're going to stay for at least 10 years. So let's say it's 0.5% per year. In our example, that would be 1,000 euros per year or around 80 euros per month. If we add up all these hidden costs, that's 595 euros on top of the mortgage. So our total cost of ownership becomes 1,595 euros per month, which suddenly looks a lot less attractive, right? At this point, a lot of people would say, well, Tom, you're overlooking two of the big benefits of home ownership. The first is that when you pay your mortgage, part of that money stays in your pocket. You are paying down the loan. You are buying equity in the house. For example, my friend Edgar said, I just loved having a mortgage because it forced me to save money. This is true if you plan to stay in the home long term. If you might have to move in a few years, then this becomes less attractive because over the first few years of your mortgage, most of the money that you pay every month is simply interest. In fact, if you do the math on a 20-year mortgage, 70% of your payments over the first 5 years will be just interest. That said, even in that case, 30% still stays in your pocket, right? So out of that 1,000 euros, let's say that 700 euros is the actual cost. And that brings our total cost of ownership from 1,595 euros per month to just 1,295 euros per month. So far, it's a tie. But then we come to the other reason why so many people love to buy their home, which is that you're investing. In our example, you had 40,000 euros that you invested to buy a property that is worth 200,000 euros. And that can be hugely profitable if the price goes up. For example, let's say real estate prices go up 4% per year. So our apartment would go up from 200,000 euros to 208,000 euros. You would have an 8,000 euro profit on your 40,000 euro investment. So that's 20% per year. That's fantastic, right? It's twice as much as you can expect in the stock market. But you have to be careful with that because that is not comparing apples to apples. When you invest in the stock market, we're talking about investing your money without leverage, without borrowing. When you invest in real estate, we're talking about taking quite a bit of risk because we are borrowing money to make our investment. Now, if I borrowed money and invested in stocks, I could also make a fantastic return. But most people wouldn't do it because of the risk. And the risk is also there with real estate. Just ask the many people who lost their life savings in the big financial crisis 15 years ago when real estate prices collapsed. In our example, if the price of the property falls from 200,000 euros to 180,000 euros, suddenly I have lost 50% of my investment. And that can easily happen. So for this reason, I really recommend that you don't think about your own house or apartment as an investment. What you want to do instead is look at the potential rent payment you would be making, then look at your mortgage payment and the hidden cost of ownership and see how the math works out. The details will depend on the point in time, the exact prices and rent levels and the city where you live. But in many cases, if you're going to stay in that apartment or house for 8, 10, 15 years or longer, it almost always makes more sense to buy. But if there's a big chance that you might need to move, then you might be better off renting. And this actually brings us to the second factor that you should consider. Because how do you know if you will stay in a place for 10 plus years? You have to look at risks. And I'm not talking about financial risks. There is concentration risk. Okay, when you buy an apartment or a house, you're buying one specific property. Now, there's a lot of data showing that over the long term, real estate prices in general have gone up. But any given property, any given area, or even any given city can struggle for a long period of time. For example, look at the prices of apartments in London over the past 10 years. They have barely gone up at all. The other aspect of risk is life event risk. For example, my business partner, Walter, he bought an apartment and he was super happy there. But then his wife and they decided to have a baby. And once the baby was born, there simply wasn't enough space. So they had to sell the apartment and they barely broke even and rent a bigger place. On a darker note, many marriages end in divorce, and that can force people to sell properties much earlier than they anticipated. And the third aspect of risk is geopolitical risk, which has been a lot more relevant recently. I have a lot of friends who are looking at the state of the world and wondering, okay, where do I want to live? And might I want to move to a safer place? For example, my friend Kasper, he bought an apartment here in Latvia. He thought it was going to be the forever home for his family. But then the war in Ukraine broke out and they decided to move to Spain. So depending on where exactly you live and what the geopolitical situation is, this can be something that affects you as well. Now, to be fair, real estate also has some positive aspects from a risk perspective. It is solid, it is difficult to destroy, it is hard to steal, so it can be attractive from a risk perspective as well. And then we come to the final factor in the rent versus buy decision, which is lifestyle. This is the reason why I personally don't buy, even though I could afford to buy this house today. It's because my wife and I, we love the flexibility of being able to live in different places. Last year, we spent 9 months in Barcelona. Today, we live in Latvia. Next year, we might be somewhere else, and we just really enjoy that. Also, I just don't enjoy taking care of broken pipes or clogged toilets or anything like that. In fact, these are the only tools I have in the house. So if anything goes wrong and I can't fix it with those two things, I'm just going to call up my landlord. And I love being able to do that. On the flip side, for a lot of people, lifestyle is the reason to buy a house. For example, my friend Martin wanted to put down roots, to have a long-term home for his dynasty, to have a place where he could have a garden and where he could have a big dog and all these things. So if that is really important to you, it can be a powerful reason to buy a house. Now, you should consider, though, that a lot of research shows people get happiness from experiences, not material possessions. So if you simply want a fancy kitchen or a big house for the sake of having a big house, that will probably not make you any happier. But if having your own house allows your children to have a nicer childhood, if it allows you to pursue hobbies that you really want to enjoy, then buying a house could be for you. But here's another interesting wrinkle. When I asked 17 of my wealthiest friends if they rent or buy, well, 9 of them said they buy, 8 of them said they rent. But here's the really interesting part. Of the 9 people who buy, only 2 bought their own place when they were young, when they didn't have a lot of money. Almost everybody only invested in their own real estate once they could easily afford it. Many of them don't even have a mortgage. And I think this makes a lot of sense. For example, when I was young, when I was trying to build a lot of wealth, I lived in a really small apartment. I had really low rent, and that allowed me to save a lot and invest a lot and build a lot of wealth. I didn't want to live in that place forever. I would be unhappy if I had to live there today. But at that point in time, it was absolutely the right choice. So if you're a smart, ambitious young person who wants to build a lot of wealth, renting could be a better choice for you. Pay as little as possible, save money, invest, and then one day, once you have a bit more wealth, you can make the choice of whether to buy or to rent, not based on the money, but based on what kind of lifestyle you want.